Thank you for that. Well, it's good to see everybody back. It's good to be back into Acts as we continue. We're going to begin Acts 9 this evening. I have a common problem in that as I began to do the work on it, it's like I got to explain a bunch of stuff again before we really get into this. Otherwise, you're going to feel that there's contradictions in here, and you won't understand why certain things are. And I think it'll be beneficial. Can we get the lights on in the center also? So, we're going to begin in Acts 9. And if you're familiar with Acts 9, you know that this particular chapter, Paul becomes the focus. And it's critical in order for us to understand what's being said, for you to be able to decipher the times of these God-inspired letters. Because if you don't really understand, like I said, you'll look at it and you'll go, I don't know, this is, it seems like Paul's saying things against the Torah. Why is he contradicting the Torah? So that's why I want to take a little bit of time here. Paul, just so you know, is a diaspora Jew, and he was born in Tarsus. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, and that tribe centuries earlier had been absorbed into the tribe of Judah. So the Benjamites became, or were called by the same name as the tribe of Judah, and today we call ourselves Jews, right? Paul, which, if you're not Jewish, is how you learned what you learned his name is. And if you are Jewish, you may have learned the same thing, depending upon who your teachers were. But his actual Hebrew name is Shaul, or Saul. So sometimes you're reading this, depending upon which translation of the Bible you're reading, why are they calling him Saul? Why are they calling him Paul? Well, we have a new translation, and his name is Shaul, and he was a rabbi. For those of you that are not aware, because I do get asked this often, which scripture or which translation we use here, myself personally, is the Tree of Life version. It's an amazing Bible, is all I'm going to say. There's a whole bunch of stuff online. But I can tell you this, that his name, Shaul, is the given name. It was never Paul. His first language was Greek, but he also spoke Hebrew and Aramaic. And there was a reason for that, because the Jewish scholars back then knew both languages. Was Rabbi Shaul a Jewish scholar? Yes or no? Absolutely. Many of the documents, the religious documents, contained both Aramaic and Hebrew script, so you needed to know them. Now, Paul was an unusual character in that he was born into Roman citizenship. A diaspora Jew born into Roman citizenship was very strange, very unique, not something that happened often. His family obviously had status. As you read between the lines, he had one of those very enviable rights of a Roman citizen, which is he had the right to appeal a court decision. He had the right, as a citizen, to be protected against unjust treatment, public arrest. He couldn't be punished, tortured, jailed, or executed by local judicial authorities. So that was a pretty unique place for this Jewish guy from the diaspora. That's why when you see that he was arrested, and he was arrested because he was proclaiming the good news, or as the Christians would say, he was speaking the gospel. When he did that, who arrested him? The local judicial people. And they weren't able to do anything because he claimed his rights as a Roman citizen and wound up, over time, in the highest court of the land. Paul was a Pharisee. Rabbi Shaul was a Pharisee. Now, we've learned a lot about Pharisees in the last 8 chapters. Why was Paul a Pharisee? This is not a trick question. No. It was because his daddy was a Pharisee. And his mommy was a Pharisee. Only kidding. He believed in the resurrection. Yes. The Pharisees, their world was the world of the synagogue. And we've talked a lot about this, so I'm not going to backtrack. The world of the synagogue stressed oral tradition or oral Torah. The synagogues in the diaspora at that time used the Greek Septuagint for their Bible. And although he was born in Tarsus, how is he usually known? Saul of Tarsus. He was born in Tarsus. He says in Acts 22 that he was brought up in Jerusalem. So even though he had been subjected to Hellenistic influences throughout his early life, it would be wrong to call Paul a Hellenist Jew. But he was called that sometimes. I want to give you an example, and I want to use, instead of it being Paul, I want to use Yeshua, Jesus. I want to use him as the example of knowing how a person's worldview or their cultural context or their life context, how much it matters. So when we are interpreting what they say, if we don't understand their worldview, put in today's more common vernacular, if we don't understand where they're coming from, then we could take out of it our worldview and disagree or think they're wrong. So again, I'm going to use Yeshua, his master, because, and don't stone me for this, even Yeshua was not a blank slate. He also had a worldview. And he was a rural Galilean Jew who was raised as a craftsman. He spoke to with regular, on the street, Jewish people, day in and day out, what today would commonly be called blue-collar Jews. So that's who his world was, where he grew up. Now, the context I want to highlight is, again, that Yeshua's world was the world of the synagogue. And because he wrote most of the New Covenant, many people have the misunderstanding that his worldview or his highlight of his world, Yeshua's world, was the temple, when in fact it was the world of the synagogue. Now keep that in mind. His common everyday world was the world of the synagogues. He only visited, according to the New Covenant, or the New Testament, he only visited Jerusalem and the temple during the biblical feast days. Is that surprising? This is Rabbi Shaul we're talking about. He knew the teachings of the rabbis very well, and he certainly did not need training in the Word of God. Why? He was the Word of God, so he knew what was going on. He was, the point being, he was quite familiar with the synagogue and Jewish social life. So let's take a couple of examples. And the first one I want to use is the Sermon on the Mount. After plainly and emphatically stating in Matthew 5:17-19 that he did not come to abolish the law, or the prophets. In verse 21, he then says, let's put this on the screen if you could read it with me. You have heard, it was said of those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever commits murder shall be subject to judgment. So this is Matthew 5:21. And immediately after that, he says this. With me? But I tell you that anyone who nurses anger against his brother will be subject to judgment. That whoever calls his brother, you good for nothing, will be brought before the Sanhedrin. That whoever says fool incurs the penalty of burning in the fire of Gehenna. So what's going on here? Well, you got to be Jewish to get this. All right? If you're not Jewish, here's your pixie dust. So y'all can get this, okay? When a Jewish teacher or a rabbi is instructing about the Torah, it is always the way they do it is they talk about a prominent past rabbi or teacher and what they said about the topic. It's always done that way. Yeshua says that this crowd of Jews had been told by the earlier teachers of their fathers was, do not murder. So that's the old that he was talking about, because they'll be judged. But now, and this is typical rabbinical fashion, Yeshua gave his interpretation of the commandment. You ready? For Yeshua's followers, this was Yeshua's oral Torah. Think about what I just said. For Yeshua's followers, he was their rabbi. Remember we talked about Rabbi Schneerson, okay, from Chabad a couple of weeks ago? Depending upon which rabbi you followed, it became your world that you were living in. Reality is that Yeshua almost always made the commandments not null and void, but stricter. What you just read was that even saying something unkind about your brother was considered to be a breaking of the commandment against murder. Is that stronger? Yes. So a few verses later we hear, read this with me, it was said, come on with me, it was said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a get, a divorce decree. So in the same fashionable, rabbinical format of the day, he's picking up a hot topic, divorce. He begins by saying that what had been previously declared by the earlier synagogue rabbi teachers about divorce is that the wife must receive an official divorce decree, and if the husband will do that, then he meets all the requirements of the commandment. But then in the next verse, he says what his interpretation of the law of divorce is. Read it together. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of fornication, makes her an adulteress. And that anyone who marries a divorcee commits adultery. So we see again here that Yeshua's interpretation about divorce is far stricter, contrary to the, I would say, rather standard Christian teaching that Yeshua was speaking against the law of Moses. He wasn't speaking against it. He was giving his interpretation, and he was actually making things stricter. The thing that would have been common in that time is that that's how everything was done. Now think about what I just said. If you lived in that time, and that was the context that you lived in, it wasn't weird. to say, it has been said, blah, 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 but I say. So what do you think some of the people were thinking? Who are you to say? You're just a schleppy old Jewish dude from the Galilee who makes furniture and is a carpenter. Who are you? Can you understand? Can you relate? You know, we as Jews have enough of an aggravation in our day and time trying to talk to our Jewish family and friends about why we've accepted Yeshua as Mashiach, as Messiah. So imagine back then, he doesn't have to tell anybody anything. They live with him. He's just one of those schleps from down the street. You know what I mean? It's just, who is this guy? Why should we listen to him? So this is an opinion. Was it harder then, or is it harder now for people who knew him then, or people who read about him now, to accept him as someone who is someone that should be listened to? What do you think? What's your opinion? Harder then? Yeah, there's both sides of the coin. You know, he was walking around doing miracles. And certainly it wasn't a secret. You know, everybody's fax machine was on. They all knew, right? Everybody knew. So he had the advantage that we have, only he used it, and rarely do we. Let me say that more clearly. He did the miracles because he could. We do the miracles because we can. We don't do the miracles because we're chicken. Am I right? We're just chicken. What if I try to heal this person and they don't get healed? Right? You know, we've done many times healing teachings here, healing services. We've had amazing results many times, things that are definitely miraculous. And most people come in because of, I guess, television, expecting people jumping out of wheelchairs and et cetera, et cetera. The healing crusades, you know what I'm talking about. Those things should be happening, but those things are not the norm. What's the norm? What kind of a healing is normal? Starts with a P. Progressive healings. Just like a scab. Slowly. Our bodies are made to heal. We get in the way, as we very well know. We get in the way of these healings, mostly with our big mouth, by speaking all the wrong things. I don't want to get sidetracked. I could go on and on about that this evening.
Isn't Yeshua our rabbi?
He absolutely is. I'll repeat that, thank you, for the internet audience. Isn't Yeshua our spiritual rabbi? Yes or no? We are so blessed, so incredibly blessed, that we have the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, the God of creation, right here in his room with us, in us, when we became believers, when we accepted him. And all we have to do is to use his power, which he gives us and wants us to use, is to do it and believe. And you will see, if you haven't already done so. If you're online and you're wondering, well, what kind of teachings does this guy do on healings? If you go onto our website, One Messiah, that's the numeral 1, onemessiah.org, and you look on the teachings, it's called Get Healed Fast, and we have a 5-part, 10 or 11 minutes each part. Very quick teaching that I've done as an overview, and then under that it's expounded upon very definitely. So if you are home and you are looking for a healing, emotional, physical, whatever, there is tremendous help for you from him online. Yes? It would seem, if you are uninitiated in this area, it would seem that, as I said, maybe he was canceling these commandments because you're not used to the debate the way it's usually done. But Shaul, Rabbi Shaul, as a trained rabbi, thought and spoke in the same usual customary way that the rabbis then did. So to the uninitiated non-Jew, Yeshua might sound, remember, Yeshua said many things that seem to be contradictory. It might sound to the uninitiated that he was setting up a new system of laws and speaking against the old system, which he is not, so let's be clear about that. So it is that when we hear Paul speak about the law, he's never talking against the law, but rather is offering his interpretation of the law. Does everybody understand the difference? Interpretation of the law. He's doing this in light of his own life experiences as a Pharisee and his training in Gamaliel's, what we would today call yeshiva, his training place, his school. But something happened in between. The Damascus Road experience radically changed everything about him, and yet nothing about him. That makes sense? He had all the past knowledge. He knew what he knew. And yet, suddenly, he knew something new. Hey, you, freezing? Would you make it a little warmer in here? Everybody's like, you don't look around. I'm up here. I see all the people going like this. For those of you that are new, you don't know that when my wife is lost, I find her in the refrigerator. I put it on. Who else is cold? Thank you, sweetheart. Now, if you can wrap your head around all of this that I've been saying regarding Paul's letters, his letters change dramatically. His attitudes towards the law no longer seems negative at times. And some of these supposed contradictions disappear. We also see that while Paul is in no way repudiating or pulling away from Judaism, because many people said, oh, he's not Jewish anymore. He's in no way doing that. He is often arguing against many of the erroneous traditions that he once taught as the truth. So when I say nothing changed and everything changed, he knows all of what he taught. He knows all the Messianic Jews that he went after to kill. He knows all that, and yet he changed. I'd like to close this evening by straightening out one last thing before we dig into Acts 9 next week. Many, many commentators will refer to Acts 9, especially 1 through 19, as Paul's conversion. You ever heard that? Okay. And nothing could be more misleading or inaccurate. And I'm sorry to say that while I don't think it's meant that way, it actually comes across as anti-Semitic. It's a Christian catchphrase that is used often. Paul himself spoke out against the concept of conversion. Clearly, when a Jew or Gentile comes to faith, but especially a Jew. Now, I've spoken against the use of this term more than once, and it's only a term. But let me give you an example. When Jackie and I came down to Florida 21 years ago or so to help start Shoresh David, the group, but the first one in South Tampa with Rabbi Steve, In the sanctuary were pews. We were in a church. And on the end of every pew, what do you think there was engraved on the end of the pew? A cross. I'm Jewish. It's like, oh, we can't have that in here. Now, I'm a pretty creative guy. And I couldn't figure out how to make that cross be covered every week without making some kind of holes in their pews, because I didn't want the Jewish people walking in like I was going, ooh. Well, 21 years ago, I was already, 15 years a believer or something like that? 14 years, something like that. 15 years later, seeing the cross still bothered me a lot. And if you're a Christian, that would be like, well, if you're a believer, you should be thrilled to see the cross. But when you're brought up as a Jew, the cross represents everything negative, like you would not believe. The Christians killed us. Jackie used to go to school in New York, and she was told she was a Christ killer. So again, where did we grow up? What did we grow up with? The term conversion is what my family used. You converted to Christianity. You're not Jewish anymore. And I didn't know any better, because everyone that we knew that did this was mostly Christians. And since I wasn't, we had to become Christians. So we converted. We were told by Christians and Jews that we converted. In the dictionary, and certainly in the sense of the word we think of it today, to convert means to metamorphose. What do we think of when we think of metamorphosis? A butterfly. Butterfly goes in, starts as a worm or a caterpillar, sometimes beautiful, sometimes not beautiful, and comes out as a beautiful butterfly. That's conversion. You understand? That's a complete change. A new creature has emerged, completely different. Paul said he did not convert. He turned. That's the term that he uses. He turned. He turned away from wrong interpretations that he taught his whole life, that he was taught his whole life. Now, this is not some, half-intelligent guy. This is, a student of Gamaliel in the highest of the Jewish universities, if you want to call it that. He was well respected. He was a Pharisee. And he was turning away from his own interpretations and from everything that he was taught. Do you think he got a bunch of crap from his family? Yes? No? Yeah, like big time, right? He went so far as to accept that Yeshua was not only the Mashiach, but he was actually God. Oh boy. Can you imagine that one when you're coming home? He didn't become a new creature, really. He was the same creature, but he had a new understanding, and it wasn't popular. It wasn't popular. He never ceased being a Jew, instead, and becoming a Gentile. No. When Jackie spoke with her rabbi, when we first became believers, it was a difficult time for us. She had been divorced for many years, for several years, and I was at the end of mine, and I had known her for years. And when we ultimately got together, we decided right before we got married, because a Christian pastor in his home shared the good news with me, Well, I was trying to sell him a kitchen. He sold me the gospel. Yeah, it was a great trade. And I accepted the Lord, came home. I was living in her house. So yes, your rabbi was living in sin. And the very first act that she and I did, because I was the influence, was I had to tell this Jewish girl who was like Miss Judaism, Miss Super Jew, you know, Jewish stuff everywhere in her house, that I accepted Jesus. I never heard the name Yeshua. And I'm for sure I'm not going to be sleeping there tonight. So I come home, and on the way home I say, honey, we need to get a babysitter. And I'll make a long story short. The babysitter was so that I could take her to a bar and tell her after I was a little sloshed. And they still let me be a rabbi. Think about that. Two Long Island iced teas later, if you know anything about drinking, which I did not, I had no idea. I mean, I wasn't a drinker. But I asked for the strongest drink I could drink that I didn't have to gag on. And it was pretty good. And I drank that whole thing and got not a buzz. I can't drink this much wine without getting a buzz. The Holy Spirit was not letting me get drunk to share the good news with this little cute Jewish chick over here. He wouldn't let me not even a buzz. And about 3 hours later, I spit it out, finally. And 2 days later, she accepted the Lord. It was meant to be. It was meant to be. I did not cease being a Jew. We have heard so many times, and Jackie has responded the same way many times. Why is it that when a Greek person accepts the Lord, that they are still Greek? But when a Jewish person accepts the Lord, they're not Jewish anymore. Think about it. It's a little weird. Rabbi Shaul did not at any time stop obeying the laws of Moses in any way. He started obeying a new set of laws that Yeshua supposedly created but did not. Does everybody understand now a little bit better? He didn't renounce his Judaism. He didn't suddenly adapt Christianity. He didn't stop going to the temple or the synagogue, and instead becoming a churchgoer. He was still Rabbi Shaul, who believed everything Jewish, recognized he made a mistake, was willing to pay the price, and did big time. Yes? So I wanted you to have that background before